November 30th, a 19th meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. City Hall is open to the capacity and physical distancing requirements, and meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city website. And I will begin the meeting by saying that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. And I will look to the committee to see if there are any disclosures of conflict. Seeing none, we will go to the consent items. There are 4 of them, and I'll look to see if there are any matters that committee members would like pulled. Oh. Okay, seeing none, I would look for a motion to move the consent items. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any comments or discussion on these items? Oh, first Councillor Turner, and then I'll go to Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Certainly, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a few. Our meeting site is down, so it's hard to pull up the documents right now, but with respect to the Rethink zoning update, perhaps through you to staff, if might get a bit of a comment on how the development plan permit or development permit system might interact with this. There's not a lot of talk on through the document, but it seems to be a pretty critical component of executing some of the London Plan aspirations.
Thank you, Councillor. And actually, I have a note here that actually city staff have a brief presentation on this item. So if city staff want to go ahead and answer Councillor Turner's question, and also if you would like to give that brief introduction right now, it would be a great time to do that.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. My planner, Ben Morin, is here to provide an overview of the project and some of the next steps. I can just respond very briefly, directly though, to the councillor's question. Provide a community planning permit system is one of the options available through the Planning Act to implement an official plan as sort of a take or different approach to zoning, and it absolutely will be one of the factors that go into the review. That is, I think, one of the more later aspects of the review that we'll be considering. At the beginning stage, there's some more fundamental questions that we'll be asking that apply regardless of the approach, whether it's a CPPS or a more traditional zoning bylaw. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ben Morin, who has a very short overview of the project.
Great, thanks, Mr. Adama.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Adama. So I'm just going to pull up my PowerPoint presentation here, if that's okay. It looks like the host has disabled participant screen sharing. Is there a way to have permission to share that PowerPoint?
To you, Madam Chair, no, we do not do screen saving during standing committee meetings as per IT's comments.
Okay, that's okay. Madam Chair, I'll be able to just speak to the PowerPoint and provide an overview of the illustrations from it.
That would be great. Go ahead, Mr. Morin.
Thank you. So just from the top, this is an updated engagement overview for the Rethink zoning project. And really what we're looking to do here is just starting with the basics of zoning. So looking at what a zoning bylaw does, It implements the objectives and policies of a municipality's official plan. So where our current zoning bylaw Z1 implements the objectives and policies of the 1989 official plan, we're looking to create a new zoning bylaw that implements the objectives and policies of the London plan. It also provides a legal way of managing land use and future development, and it's a tool to regulate the use, intensity, and form of development. So I have an image here just outlining use, intensity, and form, which are really the fundamental ways that zoning regulates land. So briefly, use describes what you can do on your parcel of land. So it might be something as broad as residential. It might be something like a convenience store. Intensity is what could fit in that parcel. So we might regulate the land through the number of dwelling units or the gross floor area of retail. Whereas form includes the shape and size, and that can include provisions for the lot or provisions for the building itself. So those are really the three things that we're looking to get to even before we start thinking about the place type and permissions on individual lots. So just an overview of the London plan approach, just to go back to that, and that's a big component of what we're looking to do with the upcoming engagement, is to bring back that conversation from Rethink London and kind of refresh that conversation before we can move forward with implementing the vision. So the London plan speaks to creating a mosaic of great places, and this is done through the place types, which place a new emphasis on use, intensity, and form. It also places an emphasis on growing inward and upward and focusing growth on nodes and corridors, as well as linking development and mobility through place types like the transit village, urban corridors, and rapid transit corridors. And it also looks to create more context-sensitive development and plan for sustainability. So in addition to providing some engagement and education just around kind of those key principles for zoning, what we're looking at doing is splitting up the upcoming engagement into sections on use, intensity, and form respectively. So for example, one question we might want to ask is what height or intensity should be permitted as of right in the new zoning bylaw? So each place type has a maximum height allowable, but not every site will be able to achieve that height. So what will be the process for achieving that height in the new zoning bylaw? Another question might be what current zoning rules that we have right now can be utilized to achieve the vision of the place type, and what new rules can we consider that might not be in our zoning bylaw right now? And then another question is how can other issues be addressed in the zoning bylaw? For example, making a more user-friendly and readable document. And so we've been working with communications as well as our consultant team to come up with some really great information for the engagement approach. And we're looking to just launch that right now and then get into kind of a more granular engagement program with the new year. So in 2021, we'll be looking to engage on general zoning issues and eventually engage on the zoning approach for each place type and on a more geographic and parcel by parcel basis. And as we gain more information from public engagement, we'll look at starting to draft the new zoning bylaw for review in 2022, and then hopefully have a new zoning bylaw prepared for 2023. And at the same time, we'll be having more technical conversations with stakeholders and some internal staff as well. And so just my last slide here is just an overview of that engagement program. So we're looking to really direct a lot of traffic to our online hub at Get Involved and focus social media on directing the public to that. As I mentioned, focusing the upcoming engagement really on education, and then looking at using tools like webinars and stakeholder workshops or things like Facebook Live, and then hopefully supplementing that with some in-person events when it's safe to host them again. So thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moran. And with that, I will go to Deputy Mayor Helmer, who had a question. If you're speaking, Deputy Mayor, you're on mute. And if you're not speaking, it's your turn. So I'll go to Councillor Hopkins, and then we'll try the Deputy Mayor again after Councillor Hopkins is finished.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to staff for their presentation. I'm glad to see that we're going to be looking at this through a reminder to what the vision of the London Plan is, and a reminder to all of us as well. I've got a comment about the public engagement process. So we're looking at about 6 months to have the terms of reference in place. And I would encourage staff to get the information out before we start that public engagement process. I think it's really important that stakeholders and residents in our community have the information in front of them before we start that. So I would encourage you to do that sooner than later. I know a time frame isn't that long here, but that's my comment. And I do have a question through you, Madam Chair, to staff about a reference to Bang the Table, just wanting a little bit more information. I understand it's a social media outlet, but just a bit more information to get to the public.
Mr. Moran?
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor Hopkins. So Bang the Table is actually the server that provides the Get Involved website. So through that, there are actually 8 different tools that we have at our disposal. And we received a presentation from Communications earlier this year about those tools. And there's a lot of really great things that we can do with them. For example, we can have more kind of open dialogue where somebody might ask a question and then we respond to that question publicly. We could also have a tool used where somebody provides comments and other people are able to add to those comments, or even add information to a map. So there are a lot of different tools that we're able to use through that. So we're looking at exploring those tools and kind of using them to for each of the focuses as efficiently as possible. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thanks. Sorry, I couldn't get unmuted fast enough. My comments are about the second item on the consent agenda. So I don't know if anyone has any other comments. If not, I'm happy to go ahead.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
So the monitoring report, I really appreciate this. I think it's a really helpful addition. Helps us keep an eye on a number of the really important objectives in the London Plan. And my only comment for consideration for future iterations is around goal 17, where we're trying to keep an eye on the objective of protecting farmland. And I think that more than the number of farms, which there's an overall trend towards a consolidation that I think the London Plan is going to have very little impact on. The acreage, I think, is probably the more meaningful number, at least to me, is what percentage of the land area is being used for farming and is set aside for that, rather than the number of farms. So if we can get that kind of data, I think that might be more helpful in that section of the report. I did want to say it was really heartening to see that we're targeting around 42% of growth that is intensification. I know our target is 45%, and so we're just a little bit shy of that, but that's pretty good for 2019. I think that's well done, and that most of that growth, 70%, has been in the primary transit area. 70% of the 42% is in the primary transit area. I think is also a really good sign that we hit the mark with those targets of 45 and 75 respectively, and that we are seeing that inward and upward piece happening already, even in the early days of the plan when not all of it is even in force and effect. So I want to say to the staff who worked on that particular project, I think that monitoring report is going to be really key to making sure that we're actually achieving the vision that's set out in the plan. And I think it's a really helpful addition to the suite of many reports that we receive at Planning Committee. So thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So that was the next thing I wanted to talk about, and Deputy Mayor hit a lot of the key points in here. Very helpful. I think the challenges with a monitoring report is that we also need to see when, sorry, is something wrong? No, your mic is on, you just maybe I need to be closer to it? Okay. So one of the challenges with a monitoring report is identifying when we are not on course. And so I think what needs to follow with this as well, and I imagine this would be a touchstone for staff over future meetings, is where we're off target, recommending whether the policy measures we have in place are sufficient to be able to hit those targets, or whether we need to add additional measures in order to be able to accomplish those things. But one of the ones that jumped out at me was the intensification strategy, and so that was really helpful to know where we are, and it'll be helpful to see that on an ongoing basis. Just note really quickly on page 45, it says areas for future focus. There's a bit of an inconsistency with the graph on 47, which shows 3.14 million tons of carbon equivalent were emitted in 2018, and then on 45, it shows 2.696 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So the base numbers is off, and then it forgets the millions of tons. Yeah. So it should probably reflect that, because that's orders of magnitude difference. The question that I have in this is, the London Plan was passed in 2016, I believe, and we're at 2020, which means that we are 1 year away from when we would normally have to do a comprehensive review. How do we address that? Do we consider that 5-year period for comprehensive review from the time that the official plan is in full force and effect, or from the time that it is passed by council?
Is that you, Mr. Adama, or Mr. Morin?
Yes, I'm happy to respond to that. Thank you, Madam Chair. The Planning Act actually allows Councillor comprehensive reviews to occur 10 years after a plan is first adopted and every 5 years thereafter. So we're in that adoption window where we have 10 years to complete our comprehensive review. I'm not suggesting that we'll wait the full 10 years, but I think within the next year or two, we will start looking at the policies and whether a comprehensive update is required. And it will be within 10 years, I'm confident, of the initial adoption.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on the consent items? No? Okay, it's been moved and seconded, so I will call the vote.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. And before we move directly into the scheduled items, I just wanted to ask the mayor if he wouldn't mind saying a few words. The City of London lost an icon last week, one of the longest serving members in all municipal councils, not just the City of London, and also a fellow Cape Bretoner. Bernie McDonald passed away last week. He was also a longtime member of the planning, what was previous iteration of the planning committee. And so many of our staff who've been around for a while, I'm sure, remember Bernie, and many members of the public who came out to planning committee meetings back in the day would also remember him. So I'll go to the mayor.
Well, thank you, Chair. You're a little funny because as you and I discussed Bernie earlier, and you asked if I'd say a few words, and I reflected on it. I think you just did. And I laugh a little bit because that was also Bernie McDonald. He could laugh and give you one back as well. I've known Bernie for, my goodness, 25 years. And he was all that you have said, Chair. Interestingly, was the impact he had on council and also with staff. He had a very, very kind way about him. He was good to get on with, but also worked with others. He played well in the sandbox, and I think it's because he was good. There's no doubt in my mind. But he had a heart, and I think that people will remember his heart and his goodwill, and the fact that there wasn't a person who couldn't feel they could call on him. In fact, even after he'd retired as a council member, people would call on him often and regularly, just so that they could, because they knew that Bernie would help. Because that's exactly what Bernie did. He helped others, and so. In fact, I remember when this council was elected, and I wasn't in the role weeks when Bernie came by the office because he wanted to extend his personal regards and wish me and certainly wish council well in this term going forward, because he knew how hard it was. But with Bernie McDonald, he just made life that much easier. He was one that anyone could approach, and those of you who you'll remember of Kensington, and, the television show, and Bernie McDonald was the king of Kensington for this council. He was just that guy that met Bernie's family. Can I say on behalf of us how much he'll be missed? We'll miss the spirit, we'll miss it, that he works for, and there were reasons why he kept getting elected, re-elected. By bigger numbers each time, just because he was that well regarded and great on follow through. He was a constituency councillor and was a great conciliator, and someone that I know will all miss. So for those that did not have the benefit of knowing Bernie, it's that's too bad. We could all take a lesson from him on how to be more effective in all that we do. So Bernie, will miss you, and to your family, our heart, thoughts, and prayers. And if there's a Cape Breton Island, and he's trying that, we'll miss him. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I was not one of the people that had the pleasure of knowing him, so I knew I was going to the right guy to say some very kind words. Thanks very much for that. I appreciate it. And with that, I'll move on to the scheduled items. And item 3.1 is a public participation meeting for an application at 1284 and 1388 Sunningdale Road West. And I will look for a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by the mayor. And I'll call that vote.
I vote yes, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Councillor.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so I'll go to Mr. Corby to give a brief introduction of this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll do a brief introduction. As you mentioned, I'll just run through the nature of the application and some issues that were raised through the process. So the subject sites are located on multiple different areas in the Fox Hollow Community Plan. This is located in Northwest London. The proposed amendments are mainly within the draft approved portion of the Kent subdivision. This is between Fanshawe and Sunningdale Road, along with an additional block on the north side of Tocala Trail and Dalmagary Road. The application was to allow for additional low density residential uses within these areas. These uses included single detached dwellings, street townhouses, and cluster townhouse dwellings. Along with this application was a red line revision application, which also requested minor adjustments to the existing lot lines between draft approved blocks, as well as the extension of the draft approved cul-de-sac at Shields Place, which results in the removal of a walkway and park block. In terms of the existing policy context, all these properties are located with the neighborhood place type of the London plan, as well as medium and low density designations within the 1989 official plan. The proposed uses are in keeping with the range of permitted uses within both plans. In terms of public concern, the first area of concern was traffic. So through the initial rezoning application, proposed amendments were to a much larger area of the subdivision and requested a wider range of permitted uses. The applicant has since reduced the area of the proposed amendments along with the range of uses being sought. The proposed uses are now similar to the existing permissions throughout the subdivision and will result in a minimal increase in potential density. Staff feel the levels of traffic planned through the draft plan of subdivision will be maintained and no additional traffic impacts will occur. Another concern was in relation to heights. This was at the block near Tokala Trail and Dalmagary Road. They were concerned about potential heights within the rear lots of the abutting single detached dwellings. Based on those concerns, staff are recommending a special provision to limit height to 10.5 meters, which is in keeping with the existing permissions on the site. Therefore, no net increase in height will be achieved through this zoning amendment. And finally, there was a specific concern raised about the rezoning of the open space lands over the park block of the original draft plan. This is a result of the proposed extension at Shields Place to permit additional single detached dwellings over the block. Staff have identified that this block is no longer required to satisfy the parkland requirements for the subdivision. As a result of modifications to the herd drain pathway network, the pedestrian path is now located on the southerly side of the drain where it was originally planned on the north side, and the future pedestrian connection now will be located further west over the drain. Therefore, the block is no longer located in a desirable location for park purposes. Staff is recommending approval for the proposed changes. We feel it's consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to both the London plan and the 1989 official plan policies, and the zoning and red line revisions as proposed are compatible and in keeping with the character of the existing neighborhood. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Corby. Is the applicant here?
I am. It's Steve Stapleton from Auburn Developments.
Go ahead, Mr. Stapleton. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're in support of the staff recommendation. We believe the amendments to our application dealt with the public input that we heard regarding height and increasing intensification. It was our objective in the original application to proceed under the London plan for intensification. However, due to the proximity of existing dwellings and existing residents, we agreed to the amendment to reduce the height, to eliminate some street townhouse zoning that we had for more of the interior of the subdivision. And we believe it still represents good land use planning, and we're in support of the staff recommendation. As Mr. Corby noted, the history regarding the park block in our red line change to extend the Shields Place cul-de-sac originated many years ago when the EA for the Herd Creek and the location of the sanitary sewer was relocated on the south side of the drain. Therefore, the walkway was also relocated to the south side of the drain, leaving this parcel and open space redundant. There was no real connection or did not increase the connectivity. And therefore, we are including it in our subdivision to maximize the utilization of this area. If there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Stapleton. Any technical questions from committee? Seeing none, I'll go to the members of the public to see if there is anybody here who would like to address the committee regarding this application. I see some movement in committee room 1 and 2. Come to the microphone, state your name, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Nasser Zabian, and I'm the Director of Finance and Marketing for XO Homes. We're opposed to the proposed change, and my justification is pretty simple. I'm here on behalf of my organization and our homeowners who purchased these lots with the hope and belief that the land behind the houses they purchased would be parkland. As such, this change would negatively impact our company's image as we rely heavily on word of mouth to ensure our company's future success. Furthermore, the clients that we've already, promised this kind of premium lot to have the right now to back out of their deals, which would negatively impact our company in a whole other way. It also, it's detrimental to our future, as I mentioned, and we just ask you to kind of consider a small business and the potential future Londoners who are moving from across the country to these lots. One person from BC, one person from Toronto, and someone who's actually in a different meeting room right now have all really urged us to try to fight for them to have this opposed. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other members of the public who would like to address the committee? There, I see somebody in number 5. You can come to the microphone, state your name, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Hello, I'm Joe Hugh. I'm actually one of the persons that has bought a lot out there, and I was actually expecting, I picked that lot specifically because of the park behind there, and knowing that there may be a change is actually, it impacted my, I guess you can say my choice a lot right now, but I'm kind of so far into this, it's like, I don't even know what to do because I was expecting a park behind there. I wanted to pick, like, these spaces are very hard to come and choose from these days, especially with so much residential buildings everywhere and it's so tight and our backyards are so small. It was something I wanted to choose specifically for my family with the dogs and my kids, right? I don't know really what else to say. I'm just, if it changes, I just know I'd be very disappointed. But I guess it's up to you guys. It's your decision. I'm sure other people may feel the same way, choosing a lot that was specifically designed to have a park behind their house, and now to have it change. Not all of them may even know about it. I was even just lucky enough to have time off work to come in and speak on this behalf. I know I've spoken to some neighbors, they feel the same way as well. I can't speak for them, but that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hugh. Any other members of the public who would like to speak to this item? Whoops. Look, ask one more time. Any other members of the public who would like to address the planning committee about this application on Sunningdale Road West? Okay. I'm seeing none, so I will look for a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by the mayor and seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, I'll go to committee. Any comments, questions about this application? Do I have a motion? Councillor Turner, you're moving the staff recommendation? And it looks like it's seconded by the mayor, and Councillor Turner is going to make some comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just really briefly, I can recognize the concern of the home builders and the homeowner in this circumstance. The challenge here is that those assurances can't really be made as the builder wasn't in control of those properties. I mean, ultimately, that parcel in assembly was one of the applicant here, and has the opportunity to provide some alternative uses and layouts for the subdivision in the draft plan. I can understand how that might impact negatively those who purchased under the assumption that there might be a park behind their lot. It's challenging because in our circumstance, what we would need to do is take a look at and say, have all the site conditions been met, and those seem to have, and it seems that staff and the applicant have worked together to find a mutually agreeable arrangement. So in this circumstance, I'm inclined to support the recommendation. I just moved it, but I do understand what that negative impact might be to the property owners. And I'm sorry that we don't have much jurisdiction in this to be able to arbitrate on that item itself.
Mr. Mayor, did you have a comment as well? No? Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I wonder if through the chair, staff wanted to address the changes to the herd drain pathway system and sort of describe what it's going to look like in the future, and why having this open space that was previously going to be used for the park, it seems like that's the major change that's really causing a lot of issues. And I think talking about what that future state's going to look like might be helpful. Specifically, I'm interested to know whether if we had this piece of property as part of a park, whether we just have two connections into the pathway system rather than just one. I just want to try and visualize what exactly this is going to look like in the future when there's a pathway, I think, on the south side, which is the change that's happened to the pathway network as far as I understand it.
I don't know if that's you, Mr. Corby, or if that's Mr. Feldberg.
That's me, Madam Chair. Thank you. And thank you to the Deputy Mayor. As the applicant noted, there were some changes near the end of the EA process where the sanitary sewer was moved. And that's when the pathway was brought to the south side of the herd drain. At that time, that rendered this block somewhat less desirable from a parkland perspective. So the Parks Department, or Parks and Recreation, they're working on some pathway upgrades within here, within the herd drain, as well as a bridge in order to create that future connection. So at this point, they're supportive of the application with that future use in mind.
Deputy Mayor?
And the idea that there could potentially be a park here with a connection and then also this other connection point. I think the nub of the issue is probably that only so much land needs to be provided for parkland dedication, and this parcel plus some other parcel would be too much. I think that's probably what the issue is, but is the idea that we just really do not want to have a park here anymore, or that we don't want to have two connections into the pathway system?
Through you, Madam Chair. It's kind of both parts. The park that location is no longer really desirable given that there's no pathway on the north side of the drain. And secondly, the issue would be that we have to acquire that park block. And given the subdivision process and where we're at, we no longer have the means to acquire it. We'd have to purchase it, is my understanding. I can't confirm that with our parks planning, but I believe we already acquired the lands we can through our parkland dedication.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? No, we have a motion. It is the staff recommendations, been moved and seconded, and I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
So we have our next public participation meeting. It is an application at 1761 Wonderland Road North, And I'll look for a motion to open. Moved by Councillor Kayabaga, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
The suspense was killing me there. Okay, I will go to Ms. Riley for a brief presentation, a brief introduction of this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This subject site is located on Wonderland Road north of Fanshawe. The lands are currently vacant with a lot frontage of 91 meters and lot area of 1.7. These lands will be familiar to you all as this application was brought forward on October 19th to Planning Committee with a staff recommendation of refusal. At that time, staff were of the opinion that the proposal for the standalone apartment building with a tiny bit of commercial was not consistent with the planned function of the commercial node. After a thorough discussion at Planning Committee, direction was given to defer the application to allow staff and the applicant time to discuss some options to see if an agreement could be reached to support development on this site. Since that time, the applicant has met with Development Services staff and the Housing Development Corporation, and a modified proposal to a modified proposed development to increase the amount of commercial floor area from the 600 to 1,200 meters squared, which is effectively doubling the proposed amount of commercial floor area that was originally proposed. And it also includes a substantial element of affordable housing as part of the facilities, services, and matters being considered in return for bonus zoning. So staff have looked at all of this and are now recommending approval for the proposed revised development, which is for the 17-story mixed-use commercial residential building with a maximum of 228 residential units and a maximum 226 units per hectare with the 1,200 meters squared of commercial. We find that this proposal facilitates the development of an underdeveloped lot and does encourage an appropriate form of development. The bonusing of the subject site does ensure the building design form will fit within the surrounding area while providing a high quality design standard. And the revised development proposal to increase the commercial floor area and incorporate affordable housing is appropriate with regards to the intensity and form and land use. It represents, which represents compatibility and fits within the context. And for these reasons, this proposal represents good planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Riley. Is the applicant here? I know. If you'd like to come forward, state your name, and you have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Scott Allen. I'm with MHBC Planning. We are acting on behalf of the applicant, York Developments. At this time, we'd simply like to express our support for the findings and recommendations of the revised staff report as presented by Ms. Riley. We'd also like to thank HDC staff and Development Services staff for their assistance through this process. Thank you. We'll gladly answer any questions committee members may have.
Thank you very much. Are there any technical questions from committee? Oh, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to staff, a technical question. On the report back that we received the first go round, one of the recommendations and the rationale for refusal was specifically on point 8, the proposed density of the residential component within this proposed commercial development of 220 units per hectare and 17 stories is too intense and should be directed to the specific areas for intensification as outlined by council. The recommendation here is for up to 226 units per hectare and 17 stories. I guess I'm just looking for some commentary on why that's no longer a rationale for refusal in this circumstance.
Ms. Riley?
Madam Chair, it's Michael Tomazinzik here. As part of our rationale and our recommendation, we also took into account the direction that was given to us from council. And one of the clear directions that we got was that this was a site that should be accommodating an apartment building. I know we had a very spirited discussion about that. It's not that the policies wouldn't contemplate this form of development, so I hope that that wasn't seen as that wasn't the messaging there, because the London plan, I'm sorry, the 1989 official plan does contemplate high density residential development in neighborhood shopping areas, and of course with the bonusing you can exceed the 150 units per hectare maximum. The London plan, which again isn't in force and effect on the site, would contemplate nothing taller than 6 stories, but unfortunately, it's the 1989 official plan that governs, and so this isn't out of scale with the 1989 official plan. But again, we're also taking into account the direction we got from council.
I'm going to go to Councillor Hopkins and then the mayor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And this is a technical question through you to staff about the affordable housing. And I'm just trying to really understand what we're doing here, allowing for the 12 one-bedroom units to move forward with 85%, not to exceed 85% over a 50-year term. And I would like clarification as to how is this different to the normal agreements that we usually have with units, and just trying to understand how affordable these units will be moving forward. Is it as clear as they'll always be 85% or not?
Going to go to staff.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Tomazinzik.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So admittedly, this is not my area of expertise, but my understanding is that they'll always be at the 85% of the average market rent. And that'll be for a 50-year term. This is under an agreement with our Housing Development Corporation to ensure that this happens as part of the development agreement.
And would that also include if units were going to be subletted? I'm just trying to understand the recommendation in the report here.
Mr. Tomazinzik, knowing you're not an expert in this, do you have an answer on that?
Through you, Madam Chair, perhaps if the councillor can just direct me to that section of the report.
So it is on page 203, and it's specific to the recommendation of HDC that the following elements constitute the affordable housing bonus zone. And it relates to number 2, the duration, 50 years, 12 affordable units. These rights shall not be assigned or sublet. Just trying to have a better understanding what that all means. And I appreciate that you may not be able to have the answer, but I think it is really important for me to understand exactly how this is going to work given the bonusing.
Madam Chair, I perhaps jumped into this conversation too soon. I didn't realize that Mr. Justicia is on this call, and perhaps he will be able to provide a better answer than I would.
Thank you, Mr. Tomazinzik. Mr. Justicia.
Good evening, Madam Chair. To the councillor's question regarding, can I just make sure that I'm confirming which section it is regarding, and then I can speak to your broader question about what's different in this one.
So it's on page 203 of the agenda, and under the recommendation where it talks about the elements that constitute the affordable housing bonus zone, number 2, at the end of paragraph number 2, it says these rights shall not be assigned or sublet.
So the rights of the, so when you're going to number 2, so in the context of number 1, the number of units and the depth of affordability. And then in number 2, what we've done that's fairly unique in this one is the proponent came forward with a great willingness to participate in a long duration affordability. And I think as council has known, this has been work that we've done over the course of the last year with a number of different developers, always looking to see how do we adapt and change to the needs of the community. And in this case, what we are saying is that we actually were able to negotiate at 50 years, we generally consider that a perpetuity agreement. So it's a very long-term agreement. And then within that long-term agreement, any tenants that are residing in that unit at the end of the conclusion of the unit, so this has been, I think, common language in the past, would be able to retain their tenancies and rates until there was a transition of tenants out. So that's when that would occur. And these rights cannot be assigned or sublet. In other words, at the 50-year mark, if there was a tenant there and that tenant decided at the 50-year mark that they wanted to leave the building, then they couldn't sublet that right. So that way we make sure that every tenant who's coming in meets the eligibility requirements. And by the way, that assignment right happens all through the process as well. So all tenants will be income tested for these units. So to your earlier question, that's similar to what we do. 85% is absolutely a great level of affordability. Remember, these are new units. 85% of AMR at the current rate would be about $720 per month for a one-bedroom unit. The duration of affordability is, I think, defining now for council that it's very long-term. So when you're looking at a public right, the public right that you are providing on one side is met with a long-term public right on the other side, the affordability. And then the third one is to work with tenant placement, so that, as in our other ones, we make sure that if there is an ability to house tenants that are higher on the priority list, then we can work with the proponent on those tenants so that there's a mix. And then the last one is that they would be included within a contribution agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Justicia. Councillor Hopkins, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that. So in other words, if the tenant came in and stayed there for 50 years, it will always be 85% below the market value. Just generally speaking.
I'm sorry, through the chair. The way it would work is that a sitting tenant's rent will increase only by the maximum allowable once per year under the RTA. That's been roughly on average about 2%. So, and that's the way it works in all affordable developments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Holder.
Thank you, Chair. As I recall, when this came before us to committee, a couple of the concerns that were expressed, one was related to this location's closeness to transit routes, and I think the argument was made reasonably well in the last discussion that was not an issue. But one of the things that was an issue, I think, was the percentage of commercial in the main area. I'd like to ask to staff, has that commercial percentage changed from the initial application? If so, by how much, please?
Madam Chair, Michael Thomas Insick here again.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Thomas Insick.
Thank you. It has changed. In fact, it's doubled in the gross floor area. Originally, it was at 600 square meters, and now it's at 1,200 square meters.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Thanks. I just wanted to ask and clarify that point. Appreciate that, Chair. Thanks, and thanks, staff.
Great, thank you. Any other technical questions? No. I will go to public and see if there are any members of the public who would like to address the committee and speak about this issue. One more time, any members of the public in the committee rooms who would like to address the committee? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, any discussion, any further discussion on this application? Knowing that we did discuss it about a month ago. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm thankful to staff and the applicant for spending some time to work together on this application and try to find some of those aspects. The commercial and the affordable housing are the two components that I'd like to commend both for accomplishing. I still have concerns with respect to it being outside of the primary transit area. I know it's close to it, but there's rationale for our policies, and the policies are strong, that we want to see consolidation along where we have infrastructure, whether that's our physical infrastructure or our service infrastructure. And this is outside of one of those areas, and it kind of dissolves our ability to be able to deliver on those fronts. There's a finite amount of population growth that happens within the city. It doesn't matter how many units we build. The question is where we put those people, and whether it's leveraging and taking advantage of that infrastructure. And by doing that, that's how we manage to keep our property taxes down. So I'm still kind of on the fence on this. I'm intrigued to hear my colleagues. I am supportive of the two big movements that came forward in this application, and I'm thankful that that all the parties had the chance to have that discussion. I'm glad we gave the time to have that discussion as well, I still feel a little bit of discomfort with us not having really addressed those key policies that we have, and getting those realized to their best extent.
Anybody else? Any committee? Oh, Deputy Mayor, and then the Mayor.
Thank you. I'm going to support the recommendation from staff. I think this is the kind of change that I thought could be worked out when we had the referral in the first place. You know, I think the commercial change is a good one. I think this is a commercial area, originally intended to be a commercial area. I can see why there's a rationale for a more mixed use building. And I think the affordability, especially the 50-year duration, is a really good improvement from a bonusing perspective. I think that's providing a lot of value in the community. It'd be great to have some affordable units in a brand new building in this part of town. So I'm going to support the application. I think it's gone in the right direction, and I think it's a good compromise. That's what we were hoping, at least what I was hoping would come back after some time, and I'm glad that it came back so quickly too. It's good that it wasn't a long delay.
Mr. Mayor, and then Councillor Hopkins.
The thing that has struck me most about the application is the willingness of all parties to come together to a solution. So thank you to staff. Thank you to the folks who worked so hard to put this together. I mean, all the staff who did that particularly, and to the applicant for being willing to compromise and work with the concerns that were expressed in the committee. If there's anything that I've come to appreciate in this committee for the time I've been on it over the last 2 years, is that when good, healthy discussion comes as a result of I think our city staff are super smart applicants who are smart, find ways to make it work, and they listen. And I think this is one of those cases where I think everybody wins through this. So thank you to all of this, including our colleagues on this committee. I think you've made this application stronger by virtue of the comments that were made in our last meeting on this. So I'm prepared to support this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I hear Councillor Turner's concerns just being outside the servicing area, as well as the transit area. You know, this is a challenge, but I think there's been a compromise here, and that affordable housing piece is something that is important, especially in this area, but also that commercial component. There has been some negotiation and compromise, and with that, I am willing to accept it, even though this is a bit of a challenge for me as well.
Any other comments? So from the chair, I'm just going to say briefly, I'm also glad that that the applicant and city staff work together. I'm happy to see the work that's been done with HDC, that level of affordability, that length of time, 50 years. I don't think we've ever seen that yet so far in affordable housing applications. And so I'm really impressed by that. I think my thanks to staff and to the applicant for working through this. And I'm just going to say, having gone through the application that I went through in my ward, which seems so very close to this, but without the commercial aspect and without, I don't think it had any affordable housing either, although I might be wrong on that. It's been a while. This is so similar that it gives me chills. And so I think all staff were completely in favor of that other building. And so it was a little surprising for me to see the initial pushback. But I'm glad that we referred this back. I'm glad that the work took place, that did take place. And I think if anybody is familiar with this area, it seems like a very good location for this kind of building. So again, thanks to everybody for the hard work on this. And if there are no other comments or questions, or even if there are, I'm going to look for a motion. Moved by the mayor and seconded by the deputy mayor. Now I'll see if there are any other comments or questions on this. Seeing none, I'm going to call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
That takes us to item 3.3. It's a public participation meeting about the proposed changes for the protected major transit station areas. I will look for a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'll call the vote.
Councillor Helmer, please. Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so this report was prepared by Ms. Joanne Lee, and Mr. Adama is going to present this report with a brief introduction, and then we'll go to technical questions.
Thank you. And yes, Ms. Lee is on the call and will be able to help respond to any questions that may come up through the chat function. So protected major transit station areas are a designation that exists in the Planning Act that encourages and supports intensification and transit-oriented development around existing and planned higher order transit stations. The PMTSA, which how I'll refer to them for the most part, was added to the Planning Act in 2017, so after the London Plan was first approved by Council. However, they are very much in line with the goals and objectives of the plan. So the city structure plan of the London Plan includes a focus on intensification around the future rapid transit areas, and that's through the downtown place type, the rapid transit corridor place type, and the transit village place type. And I think had protected major transit station areas been a part of the Planning Act when the plan was approved, they would have been just built in at that time. So the purpose of this amendment is to add policies that identify the areas of protected or PMTSAs and establish policies to support them in the plan. There's three primary benefits that we've identified to introducing these policies into the London Plan. The first is that they support the goals and objectives of the plan with regard to growth management and intensification within these strategic areas. This again supports the city structure that the plan calls for, as well as our goals and objectives to create a more sustainable city and start addressing the climate emergency. In addition to those growth management benefits, there's also benefits with regard to potential future inclusionary zoning. One of the changes that was made to the Planning Act through Bill 108 is that inclusionary zoning is now permitted only within areas that are identified as PMTSAs or that are subject to a community planning permit system. So adding these PMTSA policies will enable the future consideration of inclusionary zoning in London. And then finally, one of the benefits of these policies is that they will enable us to implement more policies and objectives of the London plan. And that is through the fact that PMTSA policies are protected from appeal. Turning to the policies themselves, there's three areas of the plan that are proposed to be amended. The first is our city part of the plan. And this is through a new policy to identify PMTSAs as part of the city structure plan, as well as to revise figure 5 of the plan to show them in relation to the rapid transit network. The second area of the plan that's affected by these policies is the place type policies, and that's again within the downtown transit village and rapid transit corridor place types. So these areas or these place types are not identified as the PMTSAs per se, but the PMTSAs are a separate designation that will align with those existing place type boundaries. So within each of these place type, we've introduced a series of policies that meet the requirements of the Planning Act with regard to PMTSAs. So those policies include, first, the policy to identify the area of the PMTSA as aligning with the place type. Second, to identify a targeted number of residents and jobs combined per hectare. So this is sort of a long-term goal for ultimate build out of the place type and a number of residents and jobs per hectare that will apply over the whole area. And so those numbers in the downtown is 280 residents and jobs per hectare, 150 in the transit village, and 120 for each rapid transit corridor. The next policy that's part of the PMTSA section or proposed section will identify minimum and maximum building heights, and those are in line with the existing policies of the London plan. And I'll just note for the maximum that they go to the what's currently described as the maximum with bonusing. So that's still proposed to be the ultimate maximum that can be achieved through the development process. The next policies identify a minimum density. This is a requirement of the Act for PMTSA policies. And these are set at 60 units per hectare or 0.6 floor area ratio for non-residential within the downtown, 45 units per hectare or 0.5 floor area ratio for the transit village, and the same 45 units per hectare and 0.5 FAR for the rapid transit corridor. You have to keep in mind with these policies or these numbers that they're minimum requirements. So the expectation is that most development will well exceed these minimums. However, these numbers were set to ensure that there's no development that is completely out of character or not contributing to the vision for the place type. The next policy that's proposed for each place type identifies permitted uses, and those are in line with the existing permitted uses of the place type, and in generally support a wide range of uses, including residential, retail, institutional, and other uses that support urban or dense urban character, as well as encourage mixed use development. And then finally, the last policy within each place type ensures that all policies of the plan will be considered and applied, so that these PMTSA policies don't stand alone, but are part of the broader planning approach within the London plan. The next section that's to be amended is our tools, and this is more technical in nature, but Policy 1787 is amended, or a new policy is added after that policy to introduce a new MAP 10. So again, the new MAP 10 will identify the areas that are determined to be PMTSAs, and those areas align with the downtown transit corridor and transit village place types. We also have proposed a new definition to be added for protected major transit station area, which includes that they are the area surrounding and including an existing and planned higher order transit, i.e. rapid transit station or stop. The downtown transit village and rapid transit corridor place type are focused around rapid transit routes and are identified as protected major transit station areas. So just to conclude, this proposed policy amendment is initiated by the city in order to add these policies to the London Plan and take advantage of the benefits available for PMTSA areas. These policies are consistent with the PPS, they're consistent with the requirements of the Planning Act, and will help to implement and achieve the vision of the London Plan. These policies will enable our future consideration of inclusionary zoning. And I'll also note that this PMTSA policies are one of the few areas where the approval authority is actually the province. So for that reason, the recommendation is that council endorse these policies and forward to the ministry for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adama. Are there technical questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Adama, thank you for the presentation. And I'd like to just get a little bit more clarification on inclusionary zoning and what we're doing today. So, or the bonusing that we do today. So it's good to know that doing the PMTSAs, we will allow for inclusion, for inclusionary zoning. Sorry about that. I'm kind of tongue-tied here a little bit. So I'm trying to understand, once this is brought forward to the ministry, then we will no longer be doing bonusing in these areas. And how further ahead will we be in supporting affordable housing? Or are we just adding another tool to the kit? Just want a little bit more what we're taking away and what we're getting by doing this.
Okay, Mr. Adama?
Through the chair, it's a good question, and there's a few different things going on, so it can get a bit confusing, but one of the things that Bill 108 did was remove bonus zoning from Section 37 of the Act. So that section is gone. Bonusing will not exist as an option going forward. However, we have a 2-year transition window to prepare new policies or delete our bonusing policies from the official plan. So that window started last September or maybe October. Anyways, it just recently began, and we have a 2-year window to change those policies. Another thing that Bill 108 did was restrict inclusionary zoning. So inclusionary zoning had existed in the Planning Act before Bill 108. But Bill 108 restricted its application only to areas that are identified as a PMTSA or subject to a planning permit system. So this amendment will allow for the future application of inclusionary zoning. And that review is being completed as a completely separate project. So nothing in the Planning Act that permits or includes requirements for PMTSAs mentions or includes any requirements about inclusionary zoning. However, in the section that gives direction for inclusionary zoning, it identifies that inclusionary zoning is only permitted within the PMTSA.
Thank you for that. And so would that mean inclusionary zoning, that would be part of an agreement between the city and the developer, just like we sort of do bonusing now?
Through the chair, it wouldn't be the same as bonusing, which is subject, is determined based on the application. And again, there's going to be a whole study about inclusionary zoning conducted over the next year. So I don't want to assume what the outcome of that study will be. But my understanding and the approaches that I've seen identify the rate and requirements for inclusionary zoning ahead of time. So it removes some of that ability to negotiate what the right rate is. However, that will all be explored in significant detail over the next year. And I can also just add that our objective is to complete the inclusionary zoning review over the next year. That's where it's identified on our work plan as well as on the strategic plan. And hopefully that will coincide with the requirement to remove bonus zoning from the plan. So at least for these areas, we'll be able to swap one tool for another in order to ensure affordable housing is attainable through the development process.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
I did see Mr. Barrett's hand up and then it disappeared. I wonder if you wanted to comment, Mr. Barrett.
Through the chair, just very quickly, just to build on what Mr. Adama said, and just to perhaps help clarify for the members of the committee. And as Mr. Adama said, the what's before you this evening, the protected major transit station area review and the recommended policies deal specifically with those provisions that we're adding and that we're bringing forward tonight as it relates to the requirements for protected major transit station areas. The only link to the inclusionary zoning is again, as Mr. Adama said, which is in another section of the Plan Act where it says that if inclusionary zoning is to be considered, the new restrictions that came through Bill 108 are only in two instances. One of those instances would be within a protected major transit station area or in the lands that would be subject to a community planning system or a DPS. So all this does is puts a set of policies and a place type in place that would allow that future consideration. But that whole process for inclusionary zoning, including all of the types of questions that the councillor is raising about what might it look like, how might it replace the tools that we're losing through bonusing, what might be the extent as to the depth or the level of inclusionary zoning, will all be dealt with through that process. It's really not part of this process at all. So we're just trying to make it clear that it's two separate processes. The other one has a lot of work, and we will be back probably many times to go through that process. All this process does is says, once you've got a protected major transit station area in place, that is where you could use that tool of inclusionary zoning.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Turner now.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Barrett. That answers certainly one of the questions that I had in mind, but brings up another. So, I mean, by its nature, it's protected major transit station areas, so that confers a protection on these corridors in such that what ends up not being allowed then, I guess. So you designate the corridors, which means it's protecting it from something, is that when that these sites maintain as corridors rather than being cut off in some way or reassembled or redirected. Does it mean that where development opportunities come forward, that they need to be done in such a way that promotes density and it's not consistent with a lower density or another use that might be incompatible with that densification along those protected corridors? How do those protections get conferred, and what specifically are the protections that are conferred by it being a protected major transit station area?
Mr. Adama?
Through the chair, I mean, the term protected major transit station area is the terminology of the Act. So we're using the provincial language to ensure that it's clear that we are providing policies that are subject to those requirements. In regards to what's being protected, as I described, the objective, or at least the apparent objective behind these policies, is very much in line with what the London Plan includes, where the goal is to facilitate and promote intensification and transit-oriented development around rapid transit corridors and stations. Some of the opportunities and requirements that I think protect the corridors for those include some of the policies for minimum densities, as well as the targeted jobs and people per hectare. So there's a requirement there on the municipality to provide for or to implement policies that will achieve that objective. So as we move through this and monitor, the policies will be ensuring that that objective is being achieved. In addition, I think some of the protection comes through the fact that these policies are not subject to appeal, so it gives council greater control over the policy approach and vision for these areas to ensure that it does support rapid transit investments.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Adama. So that's helpful. Back to Mr. Barrett's point that these are two separate things, and I recognize the attention ends up coming around inclusionary zoning quite a bit, though, every time we talk about PMSTAs or TSAs. The question that I guess that comes from that is, if we're only allowed to do IZ in protected major transit station areas, then what is to say that we wouldn't maximize the amount of area designated under that policy regime in order to take advantage of the greatest opportunities to provide inclusionary zoning development at council's discretion to be able to accomplish what we've lost through bonusing. What we've designated here is kind of two axes, an east-west and a north-south axis, where those are prioritized. But there are other transit corridors within the city that possibly could be considered for higher density and use of inclusionary zoning policies. I'm conscious and I'm trying not to conflate these two, but if this is our only policy tool in order to accomplish that until we get a community permit to planning system in place, why wouldn't we take a greater advantage of that?
Is that Mr. Barrett or Mr. Adama?
Through the chair, I'm happy to take a first attempt, and Mr. Barrett, feel free to jump in. Our thinking was that the goals of the provisions of the Act were to support intensification and transit-oriented development around rapid transit or higher order transit stations, and to us that was very much in line with the London Plan approach and could be implemented quickly without any significant changes to the approach or to the overall policies of the London Plan. It may be that in the future we consider expanding these. However, that would require further changes to any policies that would be within those areas. So projecting or a targeted number of jobs and people per hectare, as well as establishing minimum densities for development within those areas, felt like a bigger shift in terms of the planning approach from the way the London Plan is set up. So for this first go at PMTSA policies, we limited it to the areas that are already planned to support higher order transit. And again, future expansions or applications to other areas could be done, but would require a broader planning review than what was conducted as part of this analysis.
And I did see Mr. Barrett's hand pop up.
Great.
Yes, and through the chair, building on Mr. Adams' comments, it's important to note that in fact the protected major transit station area through the overall enabling legislation of the Plan Act is to align with higher order transit. And so council's decisions that are reflected in the London Plan identified the rapid transit corridors, the transit villages, and the downtown as the focus and as the spines of the higher order transit system. So that is the system that exists right now. And so these PMTSA policies would align with those place types and with that approved higher order transit system. I would suggest to you that to expand those areas would be first driven by a consideration as to what other potential future higher order transit corridors might be. And then they would meet that test of the protected major transit station areas. So right now, what the land area and the areas that have been identified coincide with those place types that in the London plan identify the focus of intensity and development, as Mr. Adams said, along the areas of the planned higher order transit system, and it aligns with the system as has been approved through the EA process to date. So what you have in front of you now does align foursquare with those areas that have been identified for that higher order intensity of development. The connection that then makes through IZ is that it gives council the potential additional tool after we go through that process to build on that intensity along those corridors and within those nodes, the transit villages and the downtown, through the use of inclusionary zoning to add as a component of that intensity affordable housing. So that's how they would marry. But the land area right now is tied to what aligns with the identified higher order transit areas and the place types associated with that higher order transit system.
Through you, Madam Chair, thanks to you both. A lot of logic in that, and I appreciate it. It makes sense to me.
So we are still on technical questions. Are there, Mr. Mayor?
Thanks very much. I'd like to move to the issue of density, which you've spoken of at some length. And I'm trying to get a sense what the proposed impacts will have on the impact will be on these proposed amendments. I'm thinking in terms of what the potential for increased density in the transit corridors. I'm thinking specifically Richmond Street. Any impact that you anticipate as a result of the proposed amendment?
Mr. Adams.
Staff?
Yep, Mr. Adams.
Through the chair, it depends on what segment of Richmond Street we're referring to. So there is an existing set of policies for the Richmond Street corridor between Oxford and Huron Street, which are identified as the preservation corridor. And those policies recognize the heritage character of that area and change or reduce some of the intensity of development that could be achieved in that area. So the policies are very clear. And if you look at the policy specific to the rapid transit corridor place type, the last policy identifies that other policies of the plan will apply, and it specifically points out specific corridor segment policies, which includes that preservation corridor. For that segment, those policies will continue to apply and prioritize the heritage character of the area. For other areas, the minimum density policies are minimums. So they don't include maximum densities that may be implemented through zoning, but will be part of a more in-depth review. But the plan itself doesn't include maximum densities, and we're not proposing to add that through this process either.
Thank you. So what's the distance from Richmond Street as being that corridor? What's the distance from Richmond Street where the rapid transit corridor policies would permit intensification? I'm trying to get a sense of what that distance would be on either side of Richmond Street. How far does that go?
Through the chair, I don't have that measurement at hand. If you give me a minute, we can look it up.
Mr. Barrett's hand is up, so I'll go to him while you're looking that up, Mr. Adama.
Yeah, through the chair, as Mr. Adams is looking that up. Generally, the corridor place type aligns with the properties that are just fronting on the corridor. So the place type as it exists now on the London plan would be the same area that would be designated as the protected major transit station area. And in most instances, that extends to the lot depth of the existing frontage along those corridors. There are some places where it's a little bit different, and there are policies that speak to how that is interpreted. But in general, it is the depth of the existing parcel fabric as you go along the corridor. That is the depth, and this amendment doesn't change that. This amendment would lay over those existing place types. So it's not proposing a higher level of intensity within the areas adjacent to the rapid transit corridors than already exists, nor is it extending the policies that would provide for additional or those minimum intensities or those minimum jobs and persons per hectare to lands beyond the existing already identified rapid transit corridor. So it doesn't spill into the adjacent neighborhood place types. It's limited to the depth of those existing corridors.
But you could have, thank you for that. So Chair, you could actually have different depths of properties side by each, just because that happens to be the nature of that actual property. And I find that kind of interesting, but you're saying it's basically a property length, whatever that might be. Any difference with where there are the PMTSAs as far as, I mean, that's the actual station itself, or that very specific area. How do you define that as a distance? Let's say, again, let's use Richmond and Fanshawe, for example.
Again, through the chair, those policies already exist and those depths already exist within the plan. So this doesn't change that. So where those existing lot fabric is, generally that's the way it works, and that's the way it's been working along corridors, not only within the transit areas, but the other, I'll call them corridor type policies that we have in the plan. There are then specific policies that speak about development within the distance of a transit stop in existing policy. But again, that only applies to that distance from the transit stop within the place type. So it doesn't extend into the next place type. So if it's 120 meters away from a transit area, it would be, or a transit stop, it would be 120 meters up and down the length of the corridor, but not depth into a different place type. If that makes sense.
Yep, that actually does make sense, Mr. Barrett. No, that's helpful. Thanks very much. So this amendment then, proposed amendment, won't have an impact on our current policies, is what you're saying then?
No, again, and through the chair, as Mr. Adams said, there's fundamentally three things that this amendment does. It describes this minimum intensity with respect to jobs and persons per hectare. It establishes the minimum levels of density within the corridors. And it establishes that these lands are within the protected major transit station area. So that's what this does. Your other policies, as Mr. Adams indicated, remain in place. And then we've got just the belt and suspenders. We've got that other policy that says, just to remind everybody that all those other policies that would relate to the place type also apply. So things like preservation, corridor segment policies or whatever would still apply because they're within the base policies of the rapid transit corridor place type. And so those still would apply.
Thank you. And thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any other technical questions? Okay, seeing no more technical questions, I'll go to the public to see, and I see Mr. Wallace coming to the microphone. So go ahead, sir. You know that you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of PEC, for having me here tonight. I am Mike Wallace. I'm representing the London Development Institute. We have lots to say tonight, so hopefully I get through it in 5 minutes. First of all, I want to thank staff for their meeting with us as an organization. We had a working group and we had a number of concerns that we brought forward. And to be frank with you, staff listened very well and incorporated quite a bit of what we had to in terms of recommendations within this report. And we do appreciate that. We didn't agree on everything, but that's no problem. Frankly, we really do not take any issue with the proposed densities or heights that's in this OPA as it relates to the place types that are in the London plan. But our big but, which you will hear much more about as we go, is we need to know and understand what the future inclusive zoning bylaw will look like for these areas, which we know will come into existence. Just to kind of follow up, I'm not sure where the mayor was going with this, but as an aside, we thought that maybe the council should look at whether the 500 to 800 meters review should be distance criteria should be reviewed. That maybe it should be a bit wider or a little more consistent. Because when you look at the map, some of our members were confused about where the actual lines were, and it might be a bit simpler. But that's a different day, a different story. At the end of the day, we're going to ask at the end of this discussion that we believe that this OPA, I know has to go to the minister, but is pretty mature prior to us seeing what the inclusive zoning is going to look like. We agree that the OPA has to be in place before inclusive zoning can be included. We understand the process, we understand that this is somewhat of a placeholder for inclusive IZ in this policy. But we don't have any clue, and I think councillors asked very, very, very good questions tonight about what inclusive zoning could look like. We have no idea. And as the developers, the builders, the ones who are spending the money and actually going to build these locations, they need to know what the inclusive zoning is going to look like and what that influence will have on the cost of providing the housing that would come through that process. IZ, so as you know, is not mentioned anywhere in the London plan. There's no policies on IZ in the London plan. There's no mention of it, and it's not the fault of the people who developed the London plan. It just didn't make the plan. So we think we need to have the as staff has said, maybe take a year to do that process. They're saying there's two processes. We're saying that yes, we don't disagree. There's two processes, but one shouldn't move ahead of the other, and that for us, it's premature to have this go to the minister prior to us at least understanding what the IZ bylaw is going to look like here in London. As developers and builders of residential commercial facilities, the PMSTAs will not proceed unless our industry is satisfied. They understand what the cost will be, the heights and the densities. If they don't match their performers, is there going to be flexibility? And how is the impact of this housing going to affect the cost of them being able to actually deliver high density housing in the transit areas? The report states that IZ is replacing bonusing provisions that were previously available, but here is a major difference. Bonusing isn't something that is something that the developer pursues. They don't have to go with bonusing. They don't have to do more development, higher buildings. That's their choice. It's based on the economics of whether that's a good decision on their behalf. We think IZ will not be, it will be much more prescriptive of what a builder and a developer needs to do. And so there's a significant difference there. And we need to understand what those requirements will be. Just give you some simple questions. I think Councillor Hopkins mentioned a few of them that we have. Like, do the building heights in the OPA include units required by IZ, or will IZ units be in addition to these heights? You know, the staff mentioned that the height that's included in this OPA is the max, including bonusing.
You
Well,
have 20 seconds left.
How much?
20.
Oh, I'll get there. Thank you, Madam Chair. We don't know about the flexibility of the IZ zoning. We don't know anything. We don't even know about ownership. What if you build a condominium that has ownership that's different than a building that is rental? How does IZ apply? All those issues. At the end of the day, Madam Chair, we think this is premature. It has to go to the minister. It's not your for approval. We think you should defer. I don't know what wording you want to use on it. Let us work with the city on the IZ bylaw.
Okay, you're well beyond
Bring
your
this thing
5.
forward and the bylaw at virtually the same time, so we all understand
Okay.
where we're working from.
You're
and
well
where we're
past your
going.
5 minutes now, Mr. Wallace.
And I'm happy to answer any questions to give myself more time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public in the committee rooms who would like to speak to this issue? One more chance. Anybody left in those committee rooms who would like to address the committee and talk about the issue of protected major transit areas? None? Okay, I will look for a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins, and I'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so we are still on protected major transit station areas, and I will look to committee to see if there is further discussion and any debate on this item. Councillor Turner.
Just go really quickly. I think the proposal is reasonable and appropriate to go forward. I think it, as detailed well by staff, this kind of builds off of the infrastructure of the London Plan and things that are already in place. It's really just reflecting the requirements of the province to identify these and translating those policy frameworks that we have into a new policy framework and just moving it over and saying, okay, you know, we've done the work and here it is. With respect to Mr. Wallace's concerns, I can appreciate what his concerns are. I don't think they're relevant at this point. I think the discussion about our affordable housing toolkit is absolutely where that discussion needs to happen, and where the definitions of what inclusionary zoning or other provisions to increase or adapt to the amount of affordable housing that's provided through development. But if we were to wait until we'd put those policies forward, I think it would be a little backwards, and we wouldn't have the opportunity to even contemplate the inclusionary zoning framework until we've done the primary major transit station areas first. So I think there's an order of operations that makes complete sense. 1, London Plan. 2, look at the shifting sands under Bill 108 and the PMS TSAs. Put forward that framework. And then 3, let's figure out how the affordable housing and inclusionary zoning provisions play into that part afterwards. So any other order, I think, would not make a lot of sense. So I'm supportive of this and willing to move when the time is right.
Thank you, Councillor. I saw the Deputy Mayor have his hand up as well.
Yeah, just in, in terms of the issue that's in front of us right now, I think the protected major transit station areas make a lot of sense. It's basically following the exact same mapping that already exists and that's already improved, that's already in place. And I don't think, as Councillor Turner suggested, that expanding it to other areas is a good idea to do right now. I think we should just put this part in place now. I have been eagerly awaiting the discussion about inclusionary zoning, which has been underway for a while as a project. I have a hard time seeing this particular thing as being premature, because what we have had over the past couple of years is a lot of stops and starts when it comes to inclusionary zoning. So back in 2018, regulations were brought in around inclusionary zoning that didn't have restrictions like this. So you could have inclusionary zoning all over the city. You didn't have to have only in protected major transit station areas, and you didn't have to have a development permit system in place to use inclusionary zoning. Then it was just, I don't know, not even a year later, that was all changed, and it was restricted down to just protected major transit station areas and development permit systems. And so there's a lot of back and forth at the provincial level around what's going to be allowed, what isn't going to be allowed. I think as soon as we can get this piece in place, we'll understand what we're talking about in terms of the inclusionary zoning conversation. Well, where, right? And this is really just dealing with the where. And I represent an area that a lot of this inclusionary zoning could happen. If there's a protected major transit station corridor running through most of Ward 4 and then up along the eastern boundary of Ward 4 to a major development site on Highbury, where a lot of new housing is going to be built. And I think the sooner we put in these policies and just say, look, this is the minimum density, this is what we expect, people see that there's not going to be any really big changes from what was already contemplated in those corridors. I think that's just another thing that is in the rearview mirror, and we can focus on the items that are in front of us when we talk about inclusionary zoning. Well, what kind of depth of affordability? What percentage of units? I think those are the really important conversations around inclusionary zoning. How is it actually going to work? What's the depth of affordability? How many units are we talking about? And if it turns out that we get into a situation where, for some reason, the heights are not appropriate, given what is coming together around inclusionary zoning, I think we'd have to revisit these policies, and maybe we do have to look at something a bit taller. Just the fact that we pass them now doesn't mean we can never possibly change them in the future. So I'm comfortable moving ahead with this particular one. I think the recommendation makes a lot of sense. It's basically just building on what's already in place in the land plan and the mapping.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate the work that staff has done on this one. And for me, it is, I am supportive of the framework. I know it's been a conversation for many years, what exactly is inclusionary zoning. And it's good to know that we have a couple of years here to do that transition. And in a sense, it is two different pieces that will be moving forward. And I'm really looking forward to understanding more exactly how it's all going to unfold. But we've got to start somewhere. This is the framework that is needed. So introducing the PMTSAs and the mapping to our plan and moving it on to the ministry is what we're doing here tonight. And I am supportive. And I want to thank staff too for doing the consultation with the stakeholders in the community as well, and incorporating their feedback as well into this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? So I have some questions and some comments, so maybe I will pass the chair over to the vice chair.
My speaker list includes you, Madam Chair. Please proceed.
Thank you, Councillor. So my first question to staff is, we had Mr. Wallace come forward. We also had a letter from Drew Lowe with this expressing the same concerns that Mr. Wallace expressed. So my question to staff is, if we pass this, if council passes this next week, then what happens next for inclusionary zoning? What will be the process? Will there be further engagement? Mr. Wallace spoke very highly of the engagement that and the consultation that took place as part of this, this PMTSA process. So what happens next with inclusionary zoning? Will there be further engagement? Will the industry be allowed to give their thoughts, concerns, input? I guess this is for you, Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually going to have Mr. Adams speak to this because he'll be leading that IZ charge, but just in general, exactly what the councillor said, starting that inclusionary zoning project is actually going to start with the conversation with the stakeholders and with the public on what does that look like. And Deputy Mayor Helmer spoke to a lot of those kinds of things that have to be done and that are laid out in the legislations, to the things that we have to look at before we even bring the policies to you or the implementing zoning bylaw. But I'll let Mr. Adama speak to perhaps some more of the specifics.
Mr. Adama.
Thank you. And I don't have a lot to add other than that we've started looking at this and what might go into preparing terms of reference and project charters and that sort of thing to get the ball rolling right away in 2021 on inclusionary zoning. The plan at this point is to bring a draft terms of reference to this committee early in 2021 and hit the ground running shortly after that. Again, the project schedule includes wrap up before the end of 2021. So it will be a busy year moving forward on this project, but as usual, engagement is the priority and will be involving all stakeholders, especially including the development industry in that.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer, and thank you to staff for that. So the goal is by the end of 2021. That sounds like a good length of time to engage with the industry and to engage with stakeholders and to figure out what IZ is going to look like. Those were Mr. Wallace's words. They want to know what IZ is going to look like. Well, they'll be part of the process, and as Mr. Wallace was complimentary of the engagement that took place as part of what we're talking about tonight, the protected major transit station areas, the stakeholders in the industry, I am confident they will again be part of this process and part of a pretty robust engagement. There was a comment that was made why, you know, London Plan never even talked about inclusionary zoning. That's because we, as a municipality, we didn't have that tool. We weren't allowed to do inclusionary zoning, I do believe, because I remember when we first talked about it and there was a different provincial government that first brought it up to us. And as the deputy mayor said, at that point, we would have been allowed to implement inclusionary zoning practically anywhere across the city. And with this new provincial government, it's a little bit more restricted and targeted. And I think that's fine. We work with the tools that we're given. And I think staff have done a really good job in trying to move forward using the tools that the provincial government are giving to us to use. So I think that this is appropriate to pass this PMTSA tonight. And it's very appropriate that we move forward and city staff move forward and consult with stakeholders, engage with them, and take their concerns under consideration and implement, and then bring back a proposed terms of reference, as they mentioned, for the inclusionary zoning. I think this is appropriate, the steps that are being taken, and I'm very supportive of this.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. I'll hand the chair back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Turner. You were no longer presiding officer at that point. So are there any other comments from the committee? Questions, comments, concerns? I'm seeing none. So I will look for a motion. And it's moved by Councillor Turner and seconded by Councillor Hopkins. And with that, I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Great. That takes us to another public participation meeting, and it is about an application, and this is another one that's been before us before, 820 Cabell Street, and I'll look for a motion to open the public participation meeting, moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, and I will go to Mr. Adama again on this, I believe.
That's correct. Thank you. So this is an application, you're correct, that was before this committee on September 21, just a few months ago, earlier this year. And at that time, the application included a change in zoning from a light industrial 1 to a light industrial 2 zone, as well as a special provision that would have permitted retail as a standalone use. At that time, staff was supportive of the change in LI1 to LI2, light industrial 1 to 2, I should say, but not supportive of the addition of standalone retail as an additional permitted use. During the discussion and debate at this committee, it was referred back with instructions to consider and work with the applicant to amend the application to permit, instead of the standalone retail, an increase in accessory retail from 100 to 400 square meters. So since that meeting, we have met with the applicant, and he has agreed with the council's direction and amended the application. So at this point, we're able to recommend approval of the application. And again, that's a change from the light industrial 1 to the light industrial 2 zone, with the special provision also added to increase the maximum retail floor area from 100 to 400 square meters. I won't go into the full property description or analysis because that was before you recently. I will only add that we support the change to 400 square meters of accessory retail, as it represents 13% or a maximum of 13% of the building floor area, so is well within the threshold of what I would consider accessory to the primary use. It supports the permitted industrial uses and contributes to the viability of this area, and supports local business. So our recommendation is to approve this revised application, as it's consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms with the London Plan and the 1989 official plan policy, and provides for an appropriate land use that again supports the light industrial activity within this area and on this property.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Adama. Is the applicant here? And would the applicant like to address the committee?
Yes, Madam Chair, I am.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, my name is Bruce Work. I'm representing this property as the owner, and through your worship and the council, and through you, Madam Chair, we met with the city on a number of occasions with Mr. Adaman and Mr. Parker to discuss this, and we, believe that changing the zoning is of no ill effect to anyone, and the increase of the retail is to allow for a better opportunity to bring in a larger scale commercial tenant in there who would require a larger amount than the existing zoning allowed for any type of ancillary retail space. And it's a option, or pardon me, a problem I've had in over the last few years. So hopefully this will be able to solve it, and we can fill up a good building with some good tenants that we can put to good use there, and hopefully employ some people in the area. I appreciate council's time on this and on the approval. I'm here for any questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Swark. Are there any technical questions from committee for staff or for the applicant? I'm not seeing any technical questions, so thank you very much. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the committee about this item? One last time, are there members of the public in either of the committee rooms who would like to speak to the committee about 820 Cabell Street? Okay, I'm seeing none, so I will look for a motion to close the public participation meeting, moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by the mayor, and I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Any comments, questions, or motions from the committee? Deputy Mayor is moving the staff recommendation, I assume. Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Hopkins. One last chance for comments. Seeing none, I will call the vote.
Councillor Hopkins. Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
We have one more public participation meeting. It is implementing additional residential units, requirements of the Planning Act, Bill 108. And I'll look for a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Turner. I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And I'm going to go back to Mr. Adama for an introduction of this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe Chuck Parker is in the meeting and has an introduction prepared.
Thank you, Mr. Adama. Go ahead, Mr. Parker.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. This city review is being done as a result of changes to the Planning Act by the current provincial government. Bill 108 made changes to various acts, including the Planning Act, and was given royal assent on June 6th of last year. The intent of the Bill 108 was to address the housing crisis in Ontario. Additional residential units were identified by the province as one of the least expensive ways of increasing the supply of housing while supporting intensification and protecting neighborhood character. The changes involved permitting up to 2 additional units in single detached, semi-detached, and street townhouse dwellings, one in the existing main dwelling and the other in a detached accessory building. Under the previous Bill 138 amendments, changes by the previous government, you could have a secondary dwelling unit in the main building or in a detached building. So the effect of the recent amendments is to add an additional unit so that now you could possibly have a total of 3 units on a property. Bill 108 also, province also indicated through Bill 108 that an OP must contain policies and a zoning bylaw must include regulations to allow additional residential units. The province indicated as well that the policies and regulations should not be overly restrictive. There should be no references to the units being ancillary or subordinate to the main unit. There should be no bedroom limits within the policy, but you could include them in the zoning bylaw. There could be exterior alterations in the front or exterior, but they must consider the character of the main dwelling and the neighborhood around it. They also indicated that occupiers of the unit didn't have to be related to the owner and that the units could be either in existing or new construction. It is important to point out that the amendments are unappealable except by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. Although the province indicated that the implementation of additional residential units was mandatory, the province did provide some leeway so that all policies and guidelines the province had indicated that the city could develop their own policies or regulations to address local concerns or issues. The attached revised official plan policies and zoning bylaw regulations that are included within our report augment the policies and regulations that were passed in 2017 for secondary dwelling units. We simply took those secondary dwelling unit amendments that were done in 2017 and added to them to allow 2 additional units on a property. In terms of the summary of the changes from the secondary dwelling unit regulations, the term instead of secondary dwelling units was replaced by additional residential units. It currently allows additional dwelling units in the near campus neighborhood area. That was approved by council previously and just recently by the OMB. We also introduced a 25-meter minimum size for any additional residential units created. And the last thing that we've changed is the home occupations are only permitted in the primary dwelling, not in any of the additional residential units. What remains the same as recommended from the original secondary dwelling unit regulations, the 40% maximum GFA for all additional residential units is maintained. The no additional parking requirement for additional units is maintained, and the bedroom limits are consistent with the secondary dwelling unit amendments. Just to talk finally about the public process that we followed, because of COVID-19 and the no assembly of large groups, we had to change our public participation forms and process. If some of you were involved in the previous secondary dwelling unit and near campus neighborhood reviews, we included a number of community meetings with each of those. While that we were unfortunately not allowed to do this time. In response, starting in February 2020, we did a number of things to try and reach as many people as possible that would have an interest in these amendments. We provided all background information on the city website. We provided an information to PEC on July 13th, and posted it and circulated it. We provided longer timelines for responses than normal. I believe our report was circulated in August, and we were accepting comments for the report right up until the end of October. We also, to try and reach as many people as possible, we went through previous secondary dwelling unit and near campus neighborhood files and identified those people who either provided correspondence, spoke at public meetings, or asked to be notified of any meetings regarding those reviews. We identified those by email or mailing address and sent them notices of both the information report and this public meeting. We also provided 4 Londoner notices. We sent direct notice to the Urban League, and we had a Zoom meeting with one community group that requested a meeting with us on the amendments. In response to all this public input, we received about 30 responses. The responses fit into one of 3 groups. There's about a 50-50 split between those who support and those who oppose the amendments. The 3 groups, the first one was owners or developers who want to add new units to their properties. The second group was those that support more affordable housing but are concerned about neighborhood impacts. And the third group were those that are opposed because of neighborhood impacts. That's a summary of the process that we followed to date. I would be happy to answer any technical questions the committee has.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. So now I will go to the members of the public in the committee rooms. You can come to the microphone one at a time, state your name, and you'll have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thanks, Council. My name is Chris Romness. I believe I spoke with Chuck via email. I'm in support of the changes, definitely. And he provided me with a bit of clarity. For just some more further clarity, if a homeowner has an existing duplex or converted dwelling, would a property owner be allowed to add a third detached unit? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the committee room who would like to address the committee?
Hey, how's it going? I'm Matt Arsenal. I just have a question about the 40% total gross floor area. So say I have a house that's 2,000 square feet, I'd take the 40%, I could build an 800 square foot addition off the back as a secondary dwelling. If it's for 3 units, does that mean my addition off the back can only be 400 square feet? I can only build 400 square feet of the basement?
Okay, we'll get answers to those questions. Any other members of the public who would like to address the committee on this?
Hello, committee members. I just want to add that the current zoning regulation for an accessory structure, they need to be reviewed and possibly amended by council in order for you to support the ADUs as an accessory structure. As they stand today, they are very restrictive, and there will be a difficulty and an obstacle to do them in an accessory dwelling. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public?
Good evening, councilors, committee members, and Mr. Mayor. So my name is Victor Anastasi. I just want to have a couple statements read here about this bill. So clearly it's an important decision point for the City of London. Right now we are in great need of additional housing stock. That much is clear based on our affordable housing policies and some of the data points out there. I think this is a good opportunity for gentle intensification, which is what a lot of people are in favor of. So we have to understand that if this policy is implemented successfully and it's not overly restrictive, it's going to lead to not just additional housing stock, but a lot of consumer spending, the jobs for the local trades, and additional sources of income for the city. There are development charges involved. There are increased property taxes as a result of this work that's done with permits. So this is good income sources for the city. That being said, one of the main policy points is that the rules to be implemented are not overly restrictive. As it stands right now, the current 40% gross floor area is a confusing point to many people who actually create these units. The new proposal for 45% of gross floor area also becomes a moving target and is somewhat confusing and restrictive. So to give an example, under the new proposed policy by the City of London, let's say you had an 1,100 square foot above ground bungalow with 1,100 square feet above ground. If you added a 500 square foot basement apartment and 400 square foot ancillary dwelling, so like a bunkie in your backyard, you would add the 500 and 400 square feet together, divided by the new total gross floor area, which would be 2,000, to achieve the 45% rule. So that means that under the new rule, there would be 600 square feet in that basement that is currently unused. This is also occurring with secondary dwellings. There's already a lot of square footage that's being wasted. And the danger is that people who do this legally, there might be people who do it legally and then further use that space in an illegal fashion. And it's not benefiting people when you can have a larger footprint in your basement of either a bungalow or a back split for that, or even a side split for that matter, even a semi-detached dwelling. So I feel like these policies are very, very restrictive, especially the new ones when you're adding a third unit. And it would benefit the City of London to follow other cities, such as Edmonton, Windsor, Kitchener, just to name a couple, where either a maximum bedroom limit is introduced, for example, 7 bedrooms. We currently have 5 maximum bedrooms. Therefore, you would have either a studio, 1 bedroom, or 2 bedroom third unit added, or a maximum square footage for the third unit, of course, respecting the required setbacks, property setbacks. So some cities are doing like 1,000 square feet, others are doing even more. So this absolute square footage or maximum number of bedrooms would eliminate the confusion with the gross floor area. That seems to be one of the most prevalent points that the City of London does differently than other municipalities. And it's not really benefiting the diversity of housing stock. So I would highly urge review on those 2 key points to create a lot of housing stock in a way that is gentle and is also borne by private citizens. It doesn't require like public funding the way affordable housing does from the provincial and federal governments. This is all borne essentially 100% by private homeowners. So It's obviously a key matter, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public who would like to address the committee? Okay. State your name. You have 5 minutes.
Hello, committee. I'm Richard Dunnick. I'm here representing the Orchard Park Sherwood Forest Ratepayers Association. I've served on the board for 10 years and have had the pleasure of meeting several of you during that time. I'm here today to state that we are in support of this current draft. This will not upset our good balance within our near campus neighborhood. It's not everything we wanted, but it's workable and a reasonable approach for near campus areas by Fanshawe and Western. There has been extensive public input gained over the past 5 years to get here. So we are in support and moving forward with these limits and necessary controls, such as the coverage percentage limit of 40% GFA, the limits on townhouses. And hey, once we put it in place, we can do a review in 2 years and tweak as necessary. We're concerned if they did deviate from the past 5 years of work on this file, and made some rash decisions, there could be unintended consequences. And we'd ask that if there was going to be deviation, that it gets referred back to staff. And that's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? No? Great. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who addressed the committee. So I have 2 questions that I've made note of, but the first one I'm not clear on. It was Mr. Ramos, I believe, had asked a question about the ability to add a 3rd unit. But I wonder, Mr. Ramos, if you want to come back to the microphone and just repeat your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So it was just some clarity, and I spoke with Chuck via email about this the other day. If a homeowner has an existing converted dwelling, so if there's 2 units within an existing property now, can they add a 3rd unit being in an accessory structure on that property? Even though the existing 2 units, I mean, they were existing before the original bylaw had passed, so it wouldn't be considered technically an accessory dwelling unit, the 2nd unit within that home.
Great.
Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks. Okay. So with that, I will look for a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Turner and seconded by the mayor, except we'll hold off on that because somebody's standing up.
My name is Sagi. Just as a clarification, what was said about the 2 units. So in specific, if someone has a duplex property, in order to add a accessory unit, it will have to go back to become a single family dwelling and then convert back to a duplex. So a duplex property would be able to, the question is if a duplex property will be able to have accessory building, and if not, it raises the issue of then that duplex property can go back to the original or in a residential area to go back to like a single family and add 2 units there. So that causes a bit of an issue, not including a duplex property in this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we do have a motion to close the PPM. It's been moved and seconded. Make sure one last time there's nobody else. Okay. Oh. Okay, come to the microphone and state your name, and you have 5 minutes.
I'm a real estate investor in London here, and I currently have 2 duplex conversions underway right now. So I just want you to consider 2 things. One, bedroom limits, because for example, I'm currently turning a bungalow, like a 3-bedroom main floor bungalow. I'm building a secondary suite in the basement, adding 2 bedrooms. That 40% rule is a real big pain in the rear end. My tenants will enjoy a really big furnace room and a lot less of a footprint to actually enjoy living in. The other issue is I'm actually excited about the 3-unit thing. I'd love to add a bunkie in my backyard. I have a huge backyard. It's in East London. I could easily add another unit out there. Lots of parking. It would work really well. It would add some more living space for people. But if it's limited at 5 bedrooms, I'm not sure how I could do that. Also, if I did build a bunkie, I would like it to be a minimum of 2 bedrooms. It would probably just be a maximum of 2 bedrooms to make it affordable. My 2-bedroom basement secondary dwelling unit that I'm building is, just so you know, it's costing me $150,000 to build it. That's what it costs for new sewer lines, water lines, electric, plumbing, HVAC, all that stuff. To make it legal, right? You know, with all the permits and BCIN drawings and all of the contractors and everything else. So it's very expensive to build a unit. I'm just a single income earner. I was actually. I don't even have a job anymore. So thanks to COVID. So it's very expensive to build these things. So we do need to have a little bit more room for the bedroom issue. Like 5 bedrooms is a little bit crazy. I mean, a lot of people's regular single family primary residence have 5 bedrooms. So if you can consider that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll check in those 2 committee rooms one more time. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the committee? I see one more.
My name is Theron Jones. I'm on the ratepayers as well for Orchard Park, Sherwood Forest. I think one of the things, having participated in this, much like Rich over the last 10 years, and meeting with various community groups, those communities that are close to the campuses of Western and Fanshawe have a unique situation because we want to support affordable housing, but we need it balanced with student housing. And we appreciate that the student makeup in our communities is very important. And it needs to be balanced and it needs controls. And we found that the proposals by city staff to cap floor areas and bedroom limits has had a very positive effect overall in the balance of the intensification of student housing in our areas. We have it, we support it, but if it goes unchecked without limits, we see the ramifications of that in more mature areas of the London's student housing areas where it's very intense, it's high density, and it's not in control. So again, we believe staff has put a lot of thought into this, they've had a lot of input, and we support the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who would like to speak to this item? One more time. Any other members of the public who would care to address the committee? Okay, we have a motion to close the public participation meeting. It's been moved and seconded, and I'm going to call the vote now.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so there were a couple of questions that were asked. So I'll go to staff. The first one was, if somebody has already a converted dwelling with 2 units, can they add a 3rd unit to that? And a similar and related question was, somebody with a duplex, would they have to revert back to a single family home before they were able to add additional dwelling units?
Through the chair, in response to those questions, the proposed policies and zoning regulations are in line with the Planning Act requirements, which identifies that additional residential units apply to single detached, semi-detached, or townhouse dwellings. So these regulations and types of units will only be considered as an addition to one of those residential unit types. Other forms or residential forms where intensification is proposed would be considered subject to another type of housing definition or dwelling unit type under the zoning bylaw.
Okay, so there was some confusion in general about the 40% gross floor area rule. And so I wonder if you could provide clarification. There were a number of people that gave different hypothetical square footages for homes, and they're confused about how that gross floor area rule actually goes into practice.
Through the chair, in response to those questions, the 40% is applied to the total floor area of all primary and additional residential units. And the intent behind that requirement is to ensure that additional residential units don't take the place of something like a converted dwelling, which may also be permitted with additional units, but subject to other zoning restrictions. So on the spectrum of residential intensification, additional residential units are the lowest or smallest form that we see. And so the regulations are intended to limit those to preserve the character of the primary unit on the property. If more intensive residential intensification is proposed, it would be considered as a converted dwelling or possibly another housing form.
Thank you, Mr. Adama. So I'm going to go to committee now for your comments and questions. Councillor Turner.
Never one to disappoint. I've got a few questions. So some of the stuff, and I guess since we've closed to PPM, it's kind of a mix of everything. So I'll ask kind of comments and questions all in one here. One of the things that I've heard since our passing of the secondary dwelling units or the accessory dwelling units policies has been a question of the order of intensification. So a house, let's say it's 1,000 square feet, we've got 40%, so they could add 40% and have 1,000 square foot, and the total of the secondary dwelling unit could be 800 square feet. Anyway, I'm not going to try to do the math because I'm going to get it wrong. But what has been happening in practice is that in a lot of circumstances, the builders are increasing the total amount of space in the primary unit and then adding a secondary unit, which has significantly augmented beyond just having a secondary dwelling unit of 40% of the primary unit in its initial state. So I guess the concern here is that same thing will end up happening with a tertiary unit as well, and I think if we continue to have the policies of keeping a maximum on the number of bedrooms, then that it doesn't become as much of an issue. But it has created a fair amount of concern in the neighborhoods that I represent, where people have called and said, well, what's going on here? And I've explained it. I said, this is a tool that is fairly effective in helping to increase the amount of affordable housing. It's a softer density. It's not creating large apartment buildings in primarily single-family residential neighborhoods. However, what it does do is it almost creates duplexing and triplexing as of right, without even requiring the zoning for that. The difference on a duplex and a triplex would be that the bedroom limit wouldn't come into play. Do we, I think the proposed amendments here seem reasonable, but do we have the ability to have some control over what happens to, like, at what point do we measure the size of the primary dwelling unit that we consider the total amount of space added for the secondary and third unit?
Mr. Adama?
Through the chair, in the zoning regulation that we've proposed, the 40% clause of section 5 of that proposed zoning change, and it includes that for the purpose of calculating gross floor area requirements for additional residential units, the following shall be included, shall not be included. And it includes additions to dwelling units completed after the date of passage of this bylaw, and gross floor area of accessory structures where an accessory structure does not include an additional residential unit. So the intent of that regulation is to prevent what you've described, where an addition is put on for the purpose of increasing the floor area to expand the additional residential unit. So in our view, this should address or help to address that concern by restricting the calculation to existing floor area on the date of passage of the bylaw.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you. That's very helpful. I'm glad to see that addressed. Sorry, I was trying to catch it through there. So thank you for pointing that out. And I think these are reasonable. I think we've heard a desire from the presenters to see what opportunities there are to do this. We haven't heard a lot of concerns. Well, when we looked at this back, I think it was in 2016, there was significant discussion around this item. And this allows, well, we haven't heard as much this time. I think perhaps part is the challenges with public participation, and in part because this has been a conscientious way of adapting this, and it looks fairly consistent with our colleagues in other municipalities. It looks here as well that we haven't put a minimum parking requirements in there, which I think is good too. So I'm generally supportive of this. I'm intrigued to hear my colleagues' comments as well, and look forward to hearing more.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank the public for coming out too. And I really appreciate the comments. And I think we've heard, generally speaking, there's general support for this and sort of going half and half. But I do hear some of the concerns, and I do have a question before I make some comments about the review process. So given that it may not be very clear and there's not too much of there's a little bit of confusion, how is the review process going to look like when, if this moves forward? Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Adama, I guess.
Mr. Adama.
Through the chair, we haven't described a specific process to monitor or review this set of policies. I would say, though, that it is an important policy of the plan and will be caught in our ongoing monitoring. You saw earlier on the agenda, the first monitoring report, there are opportunities to look at intensification and how things are trending. And this can certainly be added as an issue if, you know, through what we hear over the next, say, couple of years, there are some concerns or some obstacles within these policies or regulations. Absolutely, we can address it. It might be captured through that regular monitoring process, or as issues come up, we always have the opportunity to open up a review of any policy.
Thank you for that. I think that would be important as we go through the process, because this is a change, and I am generally supportive of this recommendation. To me, gentlemen, this is gentle intensification. It's something that I think has some regard for the compatibility of our neighborhoods and how it's going to work. It's very supportive of aging in place, for instance, and we are having an aging population, so it is sort of accommodating a number of things and also looking at minimizing the impacts to other properties. I think those are good considerations that staff have made. I think that review looking at as we move forward is going to be the monitoring. It's something that is very, I think we need to understand how this is all working and how it's affecting our policies. But I am, again, generally supportive of staff's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? All right. Okay. Can I have a motion? Did you put your hand up? Moved by Councillor Turner and seconded by Councillor Hopkins. If there is no other discussion, I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, and our last item is a request for delegation from Ms. Eve Wyatt. And Ms. Wyatt is here in the audience from Ontario Clean Air Alliance. So I would first look to committee to see if you would like to hear this delegation, and if you would, I would need a motion. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by is that Councillor Hopkins seconding the motion to hear the delegation? And I will call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So welcome, Ms. Wyatt. The committee has voted to hear your delegation tonight, and you have 5 minutes in your delegation.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and good evening, members of the committee. In order to explain why I'm here, I think there's a PowerPoint in your package, and I will not speak to the PowerPoint, but there's an illustration there that's worth 1,000 words, and it's slide 2. The slide shows the greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with electricity generation in Ontario. And the line on the left shows the actual path of those emissions. Between 2005 and 2017, they dropped 93%. This was a result of phasing out the coal plants, and it was a hugely effective measure. But as you can see, the gray line on the right starts to creep back up again. And that's because there will be increased use of gas for generating electricity. Some of it's due to a 1% annual increase in demand. Some of it's due to replacing the supply that is currently coming from Pickering, which will close in 2024. And the current plan is that all of the new demand for electricity will be met through gas-fired power generation, using fracked gas that comes from either Pennsylvania or Western Canada. And the consequence of this is that greenhouse gas emissions that come from electricity generation will triple from the 2017 level by 2025 and quadruple by 2040. And so this basically undoes a third of the progress that was made from phasing out the coal power plants. Now, the province of Ontario has committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 30% below the 2005 levels by 2030. And the Auditor General has identified that there isn't any plan to achieve this. But if the gas fire generating plants were phased out, that would achieve the goal that was set by the province. So what are the options? There's conservation, there are renewables, wind and solar, and there's the purchase of hydro from Quebec. These are all available at cost that's well below what we're paying for nuclear now. There's more than enough capacity there. They're all proven technologies. And the advantage of purchasing power from hydro is it can be used to back up power so that when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, you can use hydro to complement it. So why should London support phasing out gas-fired power plants? London has a strong, long-standing commitment to addressing climate change. And a lot of this involves electrification, which requires having a clean supply of electricity. It also supports the development of distributed renewable projects, solar and wind, and there are many jobs that go with these projects. And it supports the transition of our economy to the green future, green economy of the future. So what we're asking is that the committee recommend approval of a municipal resolution, and there's a draft included, I believe, in your package, to cap greenhouse gas emissions at the 2017 level and to phase out gas-fired power plants by 2030. And this resolution has already been endorsed by Kitchener, Hamilton, Burlington, Halton Hills, the Township of Woolwich, and there are a number of other municipalities that are considering it at this time. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Wyatt. So I wonder if committee has any thoughts, comments? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just really quickly through you, thanks for the presentation. I appreciate this. Certainly is food for thought. I wasn't aware of the intentions to move towards more gas generation. One of the things that I have heard in the past is the current gas generators that are used to supplement peak times. So we've got a fairly large amount of renewables and non-carbon sources of electricity within the province. I can't remember exactly what the percentage was, but that the gas plants were used to supplement for surges because it's very difficult to store energy, store electricity, and bring that into play when you need it on the grid at a certain specific time. So you've got your certain level, and then yeah. So that's the way it was explained to me. I'm not entirely sure if I'm accurate on that. I'd be interested to know how you account for baseline and then surge requirements if using if not using gas, if you're using something else instead.
Ms. Wyatt?
Chairman, that's an excellent question, and that has long been the case, that gas has been used for that purpose, but that is exactly the purpose that Quebec's hydro can serve. Because a hydro system that uses reservoirs, the water can be retained, and then when you need it, so at night when there's no sun, or when there's no wind, or when there are peak periods, then you release the water and you get the peaking capacity that way. So there's ample capacity from Quebec's hydro to replace gas for that purpose.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I'm intrigued to know how this might align with our current energy needs and how the City of London, perhaps in the Climate Emergency Action Plan, might line up with that and what our course of action might be from here. Perhaps through you, Madam Chair, to staff.
Okay, so I'm going to go to city staff first to respond to that, and then I'm going to go to you then I'm going to go to you, Councillor Hopkins, once Councillor Turner yields the floor.
Hello, and thanks through you, Chair. The The topic that we're chatting about here right now is quite in line with the work ongoing with the climate emergency action plan that we're developing as a city. And as a matter of fact, there are a couple of other items in our discussion primer, which relate specifically to advocating for provincial action to reduce greenhouse gas footprints, mostly from transportation, but this would actually fit in quite nicely for something that we could action as part of that plan.
Thank you, that's helpful. I'll give this some thought. Perhaps my colleagues will speak first.
Okay, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Wyatt, for your presentation. And, you know, there's a lot to absorb here, and I wish I had more questions right now, but I am just following up with staff's comments about the climate action plan that we have going. I wonder if my colleagues would support maybe this resolution going to the to staff for consideration and maybe a report back as to how this aligns with our action plan, and just more information back to the committee. So I don't know if that's a motion, but I think it's something that I'd like staff to sort of speak to a little bit more and consider.
So you used the word referral, and that sounds like a motion to me. I'll ask staff when they expect to report back on the climate emergency action plan, and if we could roll this in with part of their report back. So I'm going to you, Mr. Favreau.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, Madam Chair. The climate emergency action plan first draft, we're looking at having come forward to Council in Q2 2021, as we're just in the midst of our consultation and engagement process right now. And so this could certainly be something that would be wrapped into that process.
So Councillor Hopkins, staff will be reporting back in Q2 of 2021, and they could make this part of their report back. Does that sound all right with you?
Yeah, I think referring it to staff, I would like to see how our climate action plan is going to unfold, especially when it comes to advocating to the province. I think that's something that we need to look at all different parts of our climate action plan. And I heard staff just say that this would fit in line. So I would like to make that referral.
Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Turner. Any other comments about this? Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much. First, I'd like to thank our guest for bringing this to our attention. I appreciate that very, very much. You know, it's really easy for us to pass things back to staff. They'll never say no. They never have said no to us. And my only caution is this is an important issue. And I thought I heard from staff that this was going to be part of incorporating this amongst a number of ideas. But my practical concern is that folks, we're dealing with this pandemic, which is totally absorbing and, frankly, if I might say respectfully, exhausting our staff. And they have to deal not only with this issue, but they deal with the issue in relation to all of the things that we ask of them. And I do not know a time in the 2 years that I've sat in my role where staff have ever said no. But I'm certainly hearing time and again how stretched and stressed it is. So respectfully, my concern about this isn't that it isn't worthy, isn't that it isn't of consideration, but if in fact we're going to get something in Q2 of 2021, if that's not sufficient, or if we want to bear down further, that probably makes some sense to me. And they've heard some of the comments already. We've got pretty smart, clever people, but we love to pile on. And I say this with deep respect because we have a huge need to know. But even as we do, because it's our obligation to know, everything that we do like this just adds to our staff. And so I'm respectfully not going to support it because I think we're going to get out of our staff much of the information. And then I think the beauty of it is that if we want to pinpoint some of that in more focused ways, we'll have an opportunity to do that then. So I really, Councillor Hopkins, thanks for doing that, because I think you've highlighted to me the importance of the issue, and I think our presenter did that as well. I just think we're going to get that from or much of it, and if we want to again fine tune the request in the second quarter, then so be it. Thanks, Chair.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor, but respectfully, I think that's what Councillor Hopkins' motion does. We heard from Mr. Fabro that they are working on all of these things that have been identified in Ms. Wyatt's letter and in her presentation. And there is alignment there. So rather than do two separate things where we figure out an action plan to deal with the delegation and the request from Ms. Wyatt, it's referring back to staff. They're just going to roll it into the process that they're already engaged in. And if they choose to go in the direction suggested by Ms. Wyatt, that will be part of the process that they're already working on. So I don't think Councillor Hopkins' motion is adding anything extra. That's not what I heard from Mr. Fabro. It sounded to me that it's very complementary and will work in nicely with what they already have planned coming back for us in Q2 of 2021. But I do appreciate your concern for staff, and I share your concern for staff and the concern about adding more and more to their plate. But respectfully, I don't think that this is doing that. At least that is not what I heard from Mr. Fabro.
So could Mr. Fabro just confirm that this does not require additional, and that would make me certainly more comfortable in terms of a direction, Chair, please.
Wonderful. Mr. Fabro, do you have a comment?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for considering our workload. I really do appreciate it. But I would say that, you know, even though this pandemic is very much an acute emergency on our front step, climate change is one thing that we've certainly been focusing our attention on just as acutely as we were back last November. So this certainly is something that fits in with the work that we're doing right now, and the process that we're engaged in currently with community members and hearing ideas from elsewhere is a process that really is an intake. So we're at a point where this idea is an excellent one, and I think, you know, certainly speaking to the cleanliness of our electricity grid is very important when we're looking to electrify parts of our livelihood. So I think this does represent something that is welcomed within our consultation and shouldn't necessarily create more work for us.
You're muted, Mr. Mayor, sorry. You're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. That wasn't a total affirmation that this was going to be a zero-sum game instead of work, but I will accept Mr. Fabro's comment that not that it's important, because we knew it's important, but I'm not sure again, I heard a willingness from staff to want to please, but if he indicates that, I'm not sure that's necessarily the case, but I appreciate his enthusiasm. Therefore, if it's the will of the committee, then we'll proceed, I suppose.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I saw Mr. Barrett's hand go up as well.
Thank you, through the chair, and hopefully this won't add to the, just to build on Mr. Fabro's comments. What the Climate Emergency Action Plan is going to bring forward to you are the actions that we as a city can take, but also it'll include, as Mr. Fabro noted, consultation with the community. And what are some of those things the community could undertake? And then another element that Councillor Hopkins touched on, which is what should we do with respect to advocacy to support moving forward on addressing the climate emergency. So this request that's before you touches all of those. What we will not do, just to be clear, is we're not responding immediately to what is in front of you, which is the request that you bring forward your position on the draft resolution that they brought forward to you this evening. What we would bring back is incorporating the information that they provided, the input that's provided in the information that they've given, and work that in as part of the Climate Emergency Action Plan. And this is sort of four square with that type of information intake, as Mr. Fabro indicated.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. So Ms. Wyatt, sometimes our committee conversations go a bit like this. So just to recap, our city staff are going to take the information that you have provided. They are working already on our local City of London Climate Emergency Action Plan, and they will incorporate your information into what they're already working on. And then they're going to report back to City Council in the second quarter of 2021 with a clear direction of where they're going to suggest or recommend that council go in response to this climate emergency. So thank you very much for coming and speaking to our committee. I do appreciate the information you've provided with us, and I do appreciate the work that you and your group are doing on this file. So thank you very much. And safe travels back home. Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor, been moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Turner. Any other comments? Councillor Turner, is that what that meant? Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. So this is helpful. I recognize that Ms. Wyatt would have preferred that we sought the resolution here. And I'm curious about the timing as well, because the province may well decide to move ahead or further solidify their plans to move towards gas plant generation of electricity. I completely agree with the intent here. I need a bit more information, and that's really it for me. I need to know what the impacts of such a declaration would have, and I think I know, but I just need to have a sense of whether it is feasible and reasonable enough to be able to draw from Quebec's energy supply or not, what the barriers to that are. I have concerns about expanding the amount of gas generation that we have within the province right now. We have managed to get ourselves to about a 90% renewables for our energy generation, and if we add more gas plants, then we're going to be going in the opposite direction of that. There are many countries around the world that have moved as close to 100% on renewables for electricity generation as you can be. And I think Ontario and Canada should be as close to that as possible too. So the goal, absolutely, I agree with. The specifics, I need a bit more information. I don't want to consider this punting this down the road, because I think it's a really important policy that we need to be taking a look at. As more information is available, perhaps we may even be in a position to make this declaration independent of the work that comes back from the Climate Emergency Action Plan updates.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Any other comments? Oh, okay, I'm going to call the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. And I believe Mayor Holder wanted to make some comments at this time.
Well, thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to begin by thanking you and the 3 other members of the Planning Environment Committee who are going to be moving to other standing committees after this evening's meeting. The expertise of Deputy Mayor Helmer, Councillor Turner, Councillor Cuyahoga, and you, Chair Cassidy, frankly, we missed. It's been accrued over several years in dealing with what I have come to appreciate are the complicated issues that come in front of this committee. And it's no secret to any of you or me that this committee has an exceptionally heavy workload and deals with very complex issues that essentially define the future form and shape of the city. Frankly, I look forward to your participation and comments on these committee reports as committee reports to council, and in the various committee meetings that you will likely, some of you, if not all of you, will participate in whatever ways you're able. So in some important ways, let me tell you, I think your expertise will still be incorporated in our decision making, and that's important that you're there. I just want to say thanks I think you folks have been great. Some of us have disagreed from time to time on sides of the issues, but what is common is our heart for where we would like to see the city go. And we have the best interests of the city in place. So to all of you as members, thanks for caring as much as you do and having been involved for the number of years you've been on the committee. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any other comments? I'm not seeing any. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for those comments, and thank you from me. This is my last meeting chairing the Planning Committee and my last meeting of the Planning Committee for at least another 12 months. Who knows? Maybe I'll be back. Probably not in the chair role. It is, this is a hardworking committee, as you noted, Mr. Mayor, and you have been one of the hard-working members of this committee for the time that you've been on council. So thank you for the work you've done. But I especially want to thank city staff in the planning department, in the development and compliance areas. These meetings are so, they sit on the backs of staff, and staff, city clerks as well, especially city clerks department. They all make these meetings happen. And planning is definitely one of these standing committees where the staff work exceptionally hard. The reports that they prepare for us, the information they make sure that we have so that we are prepared for these meetings. We could not do the work that we do without the hardworking staff behind the scenes. So my heartfelt thanks to you for helping me do the work that I've had to do chairing over the past 12 months. And my heartfelt thanks to all of you members of this committee. I've served with many of you for 6 years, and it has been a lot of fun. I really do love this committee, despite the workload. I have had a lot of fun on this committee, and I will be back because I have thousands of dwelling units coming to Ward 5 over the next few years. So thank you all very much. And with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by, nobody wants to leave, moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and we can do a hand vote on that. All those in favor? And I don't see anybody opposed. I see Councillor Kayabaga's blue hand there as well. So thank you very much, everybody. We are adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll miss you.
Thank you. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Greg.